Welcome back to the NUTRIMEDICAL Report with our special panel for preparedness, civil defense, and earth changes. At the top of the hour, we have John Moore and Ann Morrison. John, tell us the latest, what's going on, and what are the top reports you're putting on your program over on Republic Radio, 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time.
Right. Well, Dr. Bill, thank you for having me, as always. Well, we continue to get confirmation about the threats being posed by the powers that be over the next several weeks. I'm going to turn off this GPS. It's talking to me here. And continuing to have the concerns that we've been expressing about what might happen between now and possibly the first week after the election. So we're tracking these events, continuing to get more information, more confirmation that the military bases on the East Coast especially are being emptied out of heavy, expensive equipment under cover of darkness using secondary roads, and that the foreign military presence is still here, paying particular attention to the possible introduction of Canadian and Mexican military as being the touch point for all hell breaking loose. So if and when we see Canadian and or Mexican troops in the streets of America, that means we're at the beginning of some really hard times.
Yeah, in other words, one of the things that appears, you always try to read between the lines, is the disinterest of Obama. It's like he wasn't even there at the debate. Suggests to me either he has an inside track on something going to happen, so it's irrelevant that he lost dramatically the debate with Romney, or that he knows something's going down that he makes it irrelevant.
Right. Absolutely.
So that would be I'd be very suspicious of that. And number two, when you hear all these things happening, it's because, they have both fighters in the ring, but they also have multiple what we call fluid plans. In other words, their plans are fluid based on everything from space weather to geopolitical to financial issues. This latest thing going on between Syria and Turkey suggests that the NATO powers that met last week have decided to say, Turkey, go crazy. Shell the heck out of them. See how far you can push them before you actually get a response, and then we'll declare a no-fly zone, and then we'll see if Russia will really back them or not, or they'll back off.
Exactly.
I think they're pushing the envelope.
A plan C and a plan D, and you're right. They're very fluid and have all the resources in the world to accomplish their goals, and multiple ways to accomplish those goals. Using those resources and killing as many thousands of people as necessary.
And remember now that ultimately they need a dialectic of enough conflict, because ultimately their goal is, let's print enough money, let's create enough dialectic of chaos, we can communize the world, which means a small, tiny, super elite. Everybody else is in what we call a classless, lower, propertyless, lower class, the proletariat. And that's what their goal is. You remember, the goal of Obama, we call Red Diaper Baby, is communism. We're not talking about social responsibility and true capitalism, which we don't have now. We have corporatism, where corporations run everything rather than capitalism. True capitalism is, if I have a good idea, I can easily get credit, like in early America. I can take that idea and expand it and hire other people to help make that product or service, and then I can expand it to become a medium and larger business and hire more people. That's how the economy grows. The government literally creating more dependent people and printing money is not an economy.
No, not at all. That is not a business model. That is a road to dysfunction and destruction is all that is.
Yeah, it's a road to, it's like, I remember a comment made years ago by a Russian that says, when we got communism, we thought we'd have full bellies, but we all looked around at each other as who is going to feed the belly.
Exactly.
Now, who's going to grow the food? Who's going to transport the food? Who's going to process it? The same way in industry. And the only areas where Russia prospered is where they had a military-style process for building biological weapons, the military or other things, where there's a top-down chain of command like in the military. And all they did was create weapons of destruction. It wasn't actual productive economy. Innovation just doesn't happen except if it's innovation to create weapons of death.
Right. So they could barely make toilet tissue that people could bear using, or shoes that would fit. They could barely do those two things.
Right. And they couldn't make a pen that would actually not skip. So what we have to realize that centrally controlled command economies like what Obama wants to do, because he's a communist, so is his real father, Frank Marshall Davis. And we're going to try to get on the author of the video. It's just an amazing documentary. It's called Dreams of My Real Father. You can get it for about $12 and change on Amazon. You got to see this. You'll freak out when you realize just how hard the documentation is, how solid it is, how the dialogue and the narrative through the whole documentary absolutely proves that Frank Marshall Davis is his father, that Obama is a communist. That's why when I heard reports back 3 years plus ago, we had a physicist that was American from Russia actually visited after Glasnost and Perestroika, and he was told that our future president would be Obama. This is back like 20 years ago in the early 90s. Obama is a card-carrying communist. I mean, that's why when he leans over to Medvedev and he makes these comments, we'll be more flexible in the second term, he's not just kissing Medvedev or Putin's butt. These guys are affiliates. Right. They have a plan, just like back in the early 70s.
From the point of conception of this man forward, he was being groomed and to become president of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. He was being, as I say, he was more than born, he was spawned.
That's probably more accurate.
More spawned.
What happened. Yes.
Now, John, we have a lot of things. They're evacuating the East Coast. They're fearing a cataclysmic event that's going to raise water levels?
A cataclysmic event of a natural nature or a man-made military type event. I tend to go towards the cataclysmic event, but it may be a man-made event that they're trying to avoid.
We vetted out this story about this Canadian astronomer astronaut, and it passes a sniff test. We talked about this last week, that in fact there is an 800-meter asteroid heading toward Antarctica before the end of this year. Now, I know there's lots of space objects. I talked to Dr. McCanney this morning. He'll be on the program next Wednesday in the third hour, Professor McCanney. And he's the expert in probably more than anybody else in the plasma universe. These comets and asteroids are highly charged objects. They have electromagnetic as well as plasma effects on stars and planets. If they're large enough, they have gravitonic effects. We're likely to see major discharges of plasma across the interstellar space if a large near-Earth object passes by, gravitational effects on earthquakes and volcanoes, and a very high probability that we have more than one object. That's one of the first statements he made. We not only have a large planetoid-like object, supposedly 5 times bigger than Jupiter, out in the Oort cloud, but we also have the returning, I call Nemesis dwarf star, we call the Passover star. Dr. Muller's theory about this is that it returns every 26 million years, and it's really way out in distant space. I don't buy that. If you actually look at the geological record, whatever the object is, it returns every 3,600 and change years, 12 to 15 years, and that object causes continental drift, supervolcanoes, earthquakes, and all kinds of things to happen. There's also other cycles, the 360-year mini ice age cycle we're heading into now, according to Dr. Easterbrook, Dr. Habibullah Adamazatov from the Russian Space Agency, many other scientists. We have the 11,500-year mini ice age cycle that's related to the precession of the equinox, where our planet axis is pointing toward Vega or the North Star, Polaris. And then we have what's called the Milankovitch cycle, which is whether or not this orbital stretch is ovoid or circular. Circular means the Earth cools off every 105,000 years to a major ice age. All those cycles, including a 62 million year cycle that brings us through the galactic planes, through the northern plane to bring us to a high energy area of space, interstellar space with a lot more particles, dust, and gamma rays and cosmic background radiation, is, believe it or not, all happening right now.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Dr. Bill, I'm mobile and dealing with rain and traffic, so I'm going to need to bail out of here.
Yeah, thanks for the update. Anything breaking, give us a shout. We'll try to put it up on our live stream channel.
You. Have a great show.
Ann Morrison is coming up in a moment, and we will be joined soon also with Alexander Backmann and Christina Consolo at the bottom of the hour. Update on what's going on in the sinkholes from Ann. Stay tuned. Joined by Ann Morrison and Alexander Backmann. And let's talk about this sinkhole down in Louisiana. We're going to get some more information, too, from Christina Consolo. This is really big. I mean, I think if you're a near-Earth tourist coming from another galactic area, you could probably see this from interstellar space between here and the moon. It's 1 to 3 miles in size. And the geology, the danger of what's going on, obviously these people kind of cut a few corners. Tell us what corners they cut and how bad this could get for the people not only of Louisiana, but what does it mean in terms of Earth changes? Because you mentioned on the break that there's also a similar change Alexander mentioned up in, I think up in Scandinavia, I think it was in Sweden.
Sweden, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us. And, of course, you're a Swedish Mexican, so you know all about this.
Well, in the central part of Sweden, on my birthday, no less, on the 16th of April, this massive sinkhole appeared out of nowhere. And it started rumbling, and the ground started shaking, and people felt it miles away. So I think what's happening in Louisiana right now is a greater sign of things to come. To my
all these strange signs.
Real quickly, I think that thing's going to sink. Further.
Well, all of these weird sounds that are heard all over the earth that you can go to YouTube and hear these weird sounds are the escaping of air as different chambers of the deep bowels of the earth are actually exchanging air, or oil is being pumped in like a hydrostatic fluid from one chamber to another as the crust of the earth breaks up and as the earth actually remodels. We're actually getting major remodeling of the earth, of the upper lithosphere. And this remodeling is what I call a precursor to what I call a lithospheric mantle disjunction. Now, what that fancy term means is that the crust of the earth actually separates from the mantle, and that it actually slides over, almost like a peach skin. If you steamed it, the peach skin rolls over the main part of the peach, and it moves. So it's not over the same part of the peach as it used to be, and that's how they discovered from space these was called underground magma domes from dormant volcanoes that weren't in any area where you'd find normal volcanoes. The magma domes were there under the ground in, say, the prairies or somewhere else because they were being fed by under hotspots, if you want to call it, just like the hotspots that feed the Hawaiian Islands. And the Earth is remodeling, and that means something big is coming. It's not just Sendai, Japan. It's not just the earthquakes down in Central America or elsewhere in Santiago, Chile, or in Christchurch, New Zealand. Things are really starting to rock and roll, and they're going to get, as Jesus said in Matthew 24, it's going to get a lot more activity, a lot more rocking and rolling.
Now that you're talking about these terrafarts, that's what I call them.
That's a good one. Good term.
Confirmed by 3 independent reports this week in this issue of Nature, an academic scientific magazine, that in fact the Indo-Australian tectonic plate has separated, and the volcanoes under the water there are just tumbling into the massive abyss under the ocean. So you're correct. The tectonic plates are separating like puzzle pieces. I believe the Earth is expanding. It's going through a phase. It's going to be birthing something.
Yeah, exactly. And tell us about how bad this is down in Louisiana. This is a big deal because the people in Louisiana, the blast zone, if this butane ignites, is going to be like 50 miles radius. It's like, oh man, that's big. And it could affect hundreds of thousands of people that are waiting for a check before they evacuate. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they want a check to evacuate from the estate.
Well, yeah, this sinkhole has now, they think that it's engulfing the entire 1 mile by 3 mile Napoleon salt dome. So you're talking a pretty big area there. And people 80 miles away from the sinkhole itself are now feeling the earthquakes as the salt dome collapses. Now, there's several caverns that have been drilled into the salt dome, and as the salt dome collapses, those caverns will be releasing whatever's stored in them. In some cases, it's butane or other volatiles, and so their plan is to flare them off, like you see on an oil rig where they flare off the methane. But it's a lot more difficult to flare butane than to flare methane. Butane is highly explosive, and it'll burn as a liquid. So it's possible that that if they start flaring butane, it will follow it'll go down the chimney and go into the cavern, And if a cavern explodes, a cavern of butane explodes, people 10 miles away will have third-degree burns on their bare skin.
Yeah, not good. What does this mean? Well, it means that if 75% of the reactors, we talked about this yesterday with Chris Harris, are within strike zone of tectonic fault line zones in America. I mean, the American Fukushima is coming. It's not like here yet, but it's coming real soon. Because New Madrid, Mark 1 and Mark 2 type GE reactors are all dangerous and stupid. The design is faulty. And on top of that, we have extreme weather, the chances of other things happening, like this asteroid that's 800 meters across, it's likely to strike Antarctica. I don't have absolute proof yet, but the smell test we did from this Canadian astronaut and astronomer makes sense. In other words, there's a lot of things going on. When they shut down the data, when they get into a state of denial, they don't want you to even question things. It means something big is going to happen. So, and what's happening with space weather? It's relatively quiet. We had 2 CMEs recently, though. We had a giant filament fall just a few weeks ago on the sun. It's often when we have low sunspot activity and the Earth is cooling off, we have big solar storms.
Yeah, they're expecting a big solar storm, but they say that the sunspots that have rotated onto the Earth side of the sun are not of a complex magnetic configuration, so they don't expect either flares from them or CME. We do have some breaks in the magnetosphere, and of course, magnetic north has moved very fast. In the last 50 years, it has moved from above the border between Alaska and Canada, that would have been 5 degrees west to 1 degree east. So it's changed 6 degrees in 50 years, and most of that, it's been a downward acceleration, so that most of that has occurred in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
Now that indicates that the torus, which we think that the nickel iron core is, because that's how you get a magnetic field, is that you wrap wire around a donut-shaped metal object, and you wrap wire around it, and then you run current through the wire, and you get a magnetic field. And we think that that's how the Earth's magnetosphere is formed, is that we have this torus in the core of the Earth, and because the magnetic north pole is shifting, and it's shifting geologically, it's running. I mean, it's going faster than anybody ever thought it would, and that means that the core of the Earth is turning. It's shifting too. And when it shifts, then the mantle shifts. And when the mantle shifts, then we get these crustal deformations, such as what Alexander Backmann was talking about over south in Sumatra, where there's actually a new tectonic plate being made.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Welcome back, and we're joined with Christina Consolo. Again, to go over to the websites, John Moore's website is thelibertyman.com, and Morrison's is homeland-defense4u.com. Alexander Backmann's website is an amazing website. You want to go to alexanderbackman.com, and Christina Consolo's primary website is fukushimafacts.com. Christina, what's happening at the sinkhole? Because we'll integrate with what Ann is saying and what Alexander's saying, because this is an earth change that indicates remodeling of the lithosphere, a change in the mantle that's tied to magnetic fields, the magnetosphere, etc. Big things are going to happen real soon.
Yeah, and I was recently introduced to some wonderful research from a gentleman named Jack Reed, who died a few years ago, but he had worked for the USGS and was a consultant for the oil industry for 40 years. And, there's always been this school of thought that the USGS had adopted, that the Gulf of Mexico is just basically a giant bowl that formed from when the continents separated. However, he proposed that not only are there faults that run through the Gulf of Mexico, but they're connected directly to the New Madrid fault. And, the big concern now, of course, with the sinkhole is that the sinkhole is likely just a symptom of a much bigger problem. And just in the last few days, with the recent oil sheen that's been spotted near the Mercando well, and now the earthquakes that have migrated south and southeast of Assumption Parish, also towards that well area. We know that there were already cracks in the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. There were concerns at the time of the disaster because of the large amount of oil that was released. The Gulf of Mexico, the floor could sink, and if it is sinking, it would pressurize the gas and push gas up into other faults, and that could have an effect far, far away from the Gulf of Mexico. You can't help but wonder if that's actually what we're seeing right now. Some of the earthquakes that are happening in strange locations, reports of ground shaking in North Carolina, South Carolina. Some of the booms underground could be attributed to gas expansion from the methane hydrates that are melting, and when they melt, they expand.
How deep do you think the methane hydrates are if you go to the ocean floor at the area of Macondo?
I don't know, but I know that there were methane hydrates that did actually come out of the wellhead.
Make a guess how deep they are. If you went down from the ocean floor, how many thousands of feet beyond the ocean floor would you go if you're just drilling through completely just concentrated methane hydrates?
Well, in most parts of the world, all the gas reserves are hundreds of 100 or more feet below the ground, but in our area of the country, in the eastern portion and mid-Atlantic states, the gas is only about 50 feet underground. So I would assume not very far below.
Well, actually, Macondo, believe it or not, they've estimated that it's 1.5 miles to 2 miles deep of methane hydrates. And those methane hydrates are right by the salt dome, which they were told since 1951, a year before I was born, not to drill there because the geologists have known for 60 years plus that most of the oil in the world is not made from ferns and dinosaurs. It's abiotic. It's from the blood of the earth, from nuclear reactions occurring deep in the bowels of the earth. And these giant sounds are basically giant caverns where oil is being shunted from one area to another because of specific gravity. Things are turning into vapors or gases. There's major things happening as the earth remodels. And when you say this could spread, we know that there's a direct link between the Macondo site, between Louisiana sinkhole areas, and also all the way up to New Madrid fault system where they're having, we call tremors or mini tremors, like crazy over the area. So something big is actually happening up there, isn't it?
It is, and you can clearly see that if you go to the Steri site or any of the helicorridors in that area and look at them, what's going on there on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of shaking going on. And, I want to remind you, too, a few weeks ago we had talked about on your show the sulfur smell that was occurring across the Midwest. And a few weeks after that, people in Virginia and West Virginia started reporting they're smelling it, too. This is coinciding with possibly large radon releases from the ground because we've had some really high radiation numbers that are even showing up on the EPA monitors. And
and then, by the way, these aren't just radon. These indicate radioisotopes and hydrocarbons being released in the bowels of the earth, and they're known before, thousands of years ago even. They knew that when there's smells released in central Germany or released in Japan or elsewhere, when the dragon deep in the bowels of the earth releases passes gas, then it's going to start, things are going to start happening. So if you look at Japanese folklore about they call the dragon that made the islands of Japan, and they talk about Mount Fuji, they understand that on kind of like a historical fairy tale level, but it's geologically correct, that when these gases come up, things are going to really start rocking and rolling. And how close is this danger? How close are we to the possible kind of breakdown and ignition of this mess?
Well, the typical school of thought in geology is always it takes millions of years for these types of changes to occur. But, every day the sinkholes are the gas releases, the gas bubbles, which are actually not bubbles, it's like boiling that's occurring in the bayou, spreading farther and farther away. In fact, the DNR, since last weekend, since they had a meeting where they finally updated the residents in that area as to some of the testing that they've gotten back about the gases and so forth, have now expanded to a regional analysis to see what else may be going on. And there was a senator from Louisiana who came out last Thursday and said that he feels that the Assumption Parish sinkhole could become another Lake Noir disaster. But, that was an isolated salt zone. In this area, in Assumption Parish, there's 50. And they're all filled with a range of materials.
They estimated that if there was an explosion at the Macondo drill site of methane hydrates, it would create a tsunami roughly 600 feet high. And it would travel 100 miles plus inland. It's interesting that within 30 days after the Macondo drill site disaster 2 years ago, the United Nations asked to move their UN equipment, which they have parked all across the Gulf states, from Florida right through to Texas, at least 100 miles inland. And it is. You can see actually from satellite photos where they have giant parking lots that used to have UN things parked within a 100-mile range. They're all now beyond a 100-mile range from the coast, the Gulf Coast. Is that interesting or what?
Yeah. It's also interesting that NOAA knew that the Macondo well was showing signs of leakage again on September the 17th. And they put a notice up on their website, but they didn't.
Well, they can see it by satellite.
In fact, press releases or anything. It was actually an attorney in Louisiana who's been trying to mitigate the damages for people who lost their businesses and so forth.
Right. Well, they shouldn't be closing out the lawsuit. I just got an oil reports recently about Belize and other areas in around the middle part of Central America and elsewhere where they're doing oil exploration. They look for microscopic satellite-based evidence of oil seeps. These oil seeps have been continuous. They never stop from the Gulf of Mexico. They're putting corexit down there at the bottom of the oil well to separate the hydrocarbons, which are going to distillates, which dissolve quickly and disperse so you can't see them come to the surface, and the Vaseline-like kind of big slug that sits at the bottom of the ocean that's probably tens of miles long and 300 to 400 meters deep that sits at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, because, if it's out of sight, out of mind, they figure, well, it's not a problem and it's still leaking. This problem has not been stopped or solved. And if there's a major break in that area of the salt dome, we could have a massive release or an ignition of methane hydrate that could create first an upward explosion and then a collapse of the ocean toward that, and the counterstrike will cause a giant tsunami. And you don't want to be within 100 miles of the coast if that tsunami decides to blow. So I would think there's a risk of something really bad happening within about 100 miles of the coast of the Gulf, all the way from Mexico through Texas, all the way to Florida.
There's been some, recent refinery fires also. I believe it was Bay Point, Texas, 2 nights ago. They had another fire, and there was one in Mexico that killed 30 people a few weeks before. And I don't know if they're having issues with the pressure underground also, but this is becoming, more and more of a problem at this sinkhole every day. Yesterday they recorded 1,000 psi coming out of that cavern, and these numbers are really high, and it shouldn't be anywhere near that, especially considering the salt dome is compromised.
Yeah, exactly. Let's kind of do a summary when we come back with our panel. Members, John Moore's already gone, Ann Morrison, Alexander Backmann, Christina Consolo. Back in just a moment. Welcome back, and our team has some interesting things to say. We'll start off with Alexander Backmann. Now, when you're looking at this, it's not to, quote, just put you into a state of fear. It's to put you in a state of prayer, a state of investigations. Keep your skepticals on, but be prepared. Be prepared with food, water, protection. Be prepared to help your neighbors who haven't been preparing. Be prepared to witness, even if you get a little spittle on you. Be prepared to actually kind of check out the facts. The fact is, we're probably going to have an increasing conflict in the Middle East. That's already a fait accompli. We're probably going to have, as we said, they say Greece and Spain are going to run out of money by November. That's next month. We're probably going to have an explosion of the salt dome, which means we're going to have fires in the lower states. They're under the underoceanic coastal batholiths of oil. The batholith of oil now, New Orleans, is the second largest one on the planet. The largest one is just east of the Yucatan Peninsula in the Gulf of Mexico. There are other large ones off Prudhoe Bay in Alaska, and the largest under, if you want to call it under territorial continental land, is the one at the southwest end of the Dead Sea, and that's an equivalent to over 27 trillion barrels of oil. And it's renewable because the earth continues as like it's the blood of the earth. What's likely to happen is that I think that a reason why Obama was acting the way he was at the debate, because it was like he knew something was about to transpire, and he was literally disconnected from the event because he thought it was irrelevant. And that means that he suspects and knows of something that's bad that's going to happen real soon that's going to make the debate with Romney irrelevant. Does that make any sense?
Brought that up too. That was my feeling as well. As soon as I saw it, that he wasn't prepared at all.
No, it's like he wasn't even. He was irritated that he even asked the questions. It's like, these are irrelevant. Why am I talking to this guy? And of course you could tell Romney was prepared, almost like he knew that something was. Right now, at a certain level of momentum that's going on, Obama has disenfranchised a lot of young people who expected him to have hope and change to get jobs. He's alienated the conservative blacks. He's alienated most Christians, including Catholics who voted pretty heavily for him. He's basically, unless he steals the election by having people vote from their coffin, which of course you know that the conservatives have been fighting to get at least voter registration lists purged, but right from Pennsylvania and other states. And then on top of this, you have a vision, Alexander, and this fits in with something that's going on, because we've had similar visions. These shelling out Syria by Turkey, the next step I expect is a no-fly zone, and I think that we're marching step by step by step toward a major conflict in the Middle East. It's going to choke off the oil. Gold jumped $30 yesterday. It's going to soon hit over $1,800. I think once it crosses what I call the gold Rubicon of $2,000, the sky is the limit. This is going to take off like a rocket. And they want to destroy the dollar. They want to destroy the middle class. And, of course, Obama doesn't care about the middle class. He wants to get rid of all classes. He wants the elite, and he wants the proletariat, which are basically starving masses of people without private property. That all your money is in their electronic system, and central control, central planning is the only way to do things. Communism deals qualitatively from what I call responsible socialism, which they had in ancient Israel. So, Alexander, tell us about your vision, and then Christina and Ann just jump in, because I think that the earth changes are going to speed up, and people are not prepared as we're heading toward Thanksgiving next month and Christmas. People are not ready for whatever's coming, because I think it's going to get a lot different than what they expect.
All right. I was middle of the day sending an email, and suddenly, I started praying, and I had this open-eyed vision. I don't like these visions because they're vivid. It's like you're bilocating to the place where it's happening. And
they're painful.
I'm flying. The Lord is behind me. Angels beside me. I'm flying over the Mississippi River, but everything instead of water is orange. It's on fire. There's billowing smoke pillars coming out of the river. There's fire everywhere. All the cities along the Mississippi River, from the Gulf upwards, we were going northward, were on fire. The smoke was so tremendous. We went through this black thick smoke. We went over the cities. The cities were all on fire. We landed where we went down on a specific city. There were buildings on the main boulevard of the city. People were walking just in shock, with their arms up, with their eyes in shock and awe of what had happened. I remember clearly babies crying inside the apartment buildings and nobody attending them. And this was incredible. I mean, just the scenario was just pure horror, because nobody knew what had just happened. But everything, the whole sky was red. It was about 6 p.m., but everything was on fire. The sky literally was on fire. And that doesn't include, the nuke going off in Houston that I also saw on another occasion. But just know that things are coming this way, and just pray and trust the Lord and just prepare.
Right, but there's embedded Hezbollah and Iranian special Quds forces here in North America and in the West already, that they're holding back. Syria and Iran are holding back. They're not even responding when they're shelling up to 10 kilometers inside Syrian territory. That means they've not been given the order to respond, and when they do, literally, God help us. This is not going to be funny. Mr. Tayyip Erdogan is nuts. He thinks that they're going to get away with just continuing to shell, and this is going to solve anything. And if they try to put a no-fly zone over Syria, that's when things are going to start rocking and rolling. The no-fly zone will be the kicker that'll probably close the Strait of Hormuz, because they know that they have to take out Syria to remove Iran and to make sure the Kurds don't develop a new Kurdish oil empire, which will mean a new shift of power away from the Sunni Shiites, the Sunni Arabs that include Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Arab Emirates, etc. This is what's really going on, and I expect this next year, to be the time to lay the groundwork for the peace treaty, and whoever the next president is, he will probably be the one to declare the rebuilding of the Herodian temple. So, scary stuff, but it's happening. Sorry, we're I wish the movie would be delayed a few decades or centuries, but it's not going to. I think it's going to happen soon. Any comments, Ann or Christina?
Well, our government's certainly preparing for something, and there was legislation that needs to be updated, proposed in Congress September the 26th. I believe it's HB 6566. FEMA wants to update its preparedness plans for a mass fatality event. Some of the other orders that have gone through DHS recently have been unlimited quantities of temporary housing, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. And they're also looking to purchase these dosimeters that function like a gamma spectrometer. It's a badge that workers could wear. It will actually break down the isotopes and concentration and then plug into a computer later to download data. They're testing prototypes of that right now in Nevada, and they're looking to order a mass quantity of those. So why do they need them? Be really concerned if you live downwind of any nuke plants, too, with the kind of geological disturbances that we're having and what FEMA's been buying, that you have an escape route planned and at least talk about it with your family ahead of time.
The general rules of thumb is don't be near the coast, on the east coast of the United States or Canada, that could be struck by the El Hierro and the Azores blowing and causing this giant rock to end up in the ocean, driving an 800-foot wall of water toward you. Number 2, don't be downwind of a nuclear plant. Don't be near a fault line. Don't be below a major dam that could break just because of a geological event. And don't be in an area where, you're in a giant population area. I tell people if your job's in L.A., move to the outskirts of L.A. and then have a place up in the mountains. Don't be in any big city. Don't have to try to see if you can escape the big city, because once a disaster happens, it's gridlock. You're almost better to stay in place in your own home and to leave later, maybe 30 days later, if you can hunker down. But the idea of trying to leave in the middle of a disaster is a formula for catastrophe. So
absolutely, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the FEMA people told me. They said that when I was taking my training here in St. Louis, they said, well, you're either going to die on your car, on the freeway, or you're going to die in your home, so where will you be more comfortable?
Well, I'd rather die with, Creedence Clearwater Revival there in the bayou, singing Bad Moon Rising.
Mm-hmm. I think what's likely to happen is God's going to direct us to have places of refuge where people are studying, and that means using your intellect and praying. You're going to know where it's safe to go. And one of the things that I put in the first chapter of the scroll is God told me to escape to the land of the north before the great and terrible day. So if you're in America, believe it or not, it's not to go south toward Mexico, it's to go north. North. And remember all those principles. Don't be below a dam. Don't be near a tsunami zone. Don't be downwind of a nuclear reactor. Don't be near a big population center. Be able to grow food. Be able to have a community or group of people that have put something together, even if it's just all-weather tents and the ability to erect a greenhouse and have water nearby or well. You'd be surprised how little you need to survive if you all have the skill sets to do so.
Forewarned is forearmed.
Yeah, I think things are going to get crazier than people realize, and I'd rather people be ready now in 2012 if something happens in 2016 or 17. But I think we're going to have enough bad events that people will realize it's not the beginning of the end, it's the beginning of the middle of the disaster. In other words, things are starting to move up now to a higher level.